There, it's Lara here with your weekly Witchy Wednesday astrology forecast. This one's for the week of April 24th to 30th, 2019. So, as always, welcome and thanks for being here. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, then I would love it if you would do that. And that's a way of letting me know that the messages are resonating with you, and it's a way of allowing you to get these forecasts when they come out. Especially if you hit the little bell notification button, you'll get notified when a new video comes out, and that way you won't miss it. So, before I dive in here, I'll just remind you, if you're looking at getting a personal reading for yourself or somebody else as a gift, then please check out my website. The link is below. And if you have any questions, reach out and let me know. Right now, there's about a 2-ish week waiting period to get your reading, just in terms of how busy I am right now. And I am going away for a week on May 1st. And so there may be a little bit of a delay if you order just before that or during that time. Okay, and also if you haven't yet connected on Facebook and Instagram and you want to keep, get more regular updates and that kind of thing, and you want to just check in there, then the links are below as well. Okay, so there are some powerful shifts happening this week. And in fact, I'm recording this video a couple of days earlier on Monday rather than Wednesday, because I have some things going on at the beginning of this week that will prevent me from recording on Wednesday. So as I'm recording this on Monday the 22nd, we actually have the Sun and Uranus conjuncting each other, very closely conjunct each other. And as a matter of fact, in astrology, we call this cazimi or combust, meaning that the planet that is meeting up with the Sun is right at the heart of the Sun. So the two energies of the planets that are meeting up, in this case Uranus and the Sun, are just completely merging, combusting, right? And so this is happening specifically at about 3 degrees of Taurus. So you can look to where Taurus falls in your chart, the house that it falls in, for a little bit of insight in terms of the life area you may feel this in. But, the exact time of the conjunction is actually a couple days before you're getting this video, but it's a big event. So you'll still be feeling this. And I did speak to it a little bit in last week's video for sure, but I thought it was worth mentioning again here. And just to let you know that when Uranus and the Sun are coming together here, this points to some kind of potentially, sudden kind of change, need for liberation, need for shaking things up a little bit. And how this impacts you, of course, depends entirely on where it falls in your chart and how strongly it's impacting your chart. But also, it has to do with, how willing you are to change, or how willing you are to get out of your comfort zone, how willing you are to really do something different, willingly, intentionally do something different. And that's sort of the best way to work with this energy, is to be intentional about it, like some kind of intentional sort of experiment, almost, right? So do something that's out of the ordinary for you that you wouldn't normally do. That doesn't mean like a massive dangerous risk. It could be, switching up your diet, particularly if this is happening in the 6th house for you, say. Or it could be how you approach your resources, your money, and doing something different there. If it's happening in your 2nd house, for example, how you relate to your kids. If it's happening in your 5th house, some kind of trying a different approach is is a good idea, being intentional about the change, right? So I wanted to mention that to you. This can be really empowering, particularly as it's happening in, close proximity, in terms of the dates, to the other two big events that are happening this week, which have to do with Saturn, well, first Pluto, then Saturn stationing retrograde in Capricorn. So we're going to spend some time talking about that in this video, and I will address that through the signs when we get closer to the end of the video. But before I do that, one more word about this Sun-Uranus conjunction. As I said, like, by the time you're watching this, the exact conjunction will be passing, but you'll still be feeling the lingering effects of it. And in fact, this will happen again. It's a yearly event, right? Sun-Uranus conjunction, and it will happen every year for like the next kind of 7 years. I mentioned this in last week's video because Uranus is in Taurus, so it will happen in the same area of our chart, but it's kind of like it gets highlighted when this is happening with the conjunction. So you can feel a bit like your nervous system is a bit on overdrive too. I've definitely been feeling that way. I haven't been sleeping particularly well this week. You can be feeling a bit highly charged, and your mind can, be a bit overactive, and you might be a little bit, quickly triggered, quick to anger, those kinds of things. And then this can be also, like, there's a lot of things overlapping this week, right? So on the 27th, we actually have Mars in Gemini squaring Neptune in Pisces. This is happening right between Pluto going retrograde and Saturn going retrograde, which I'm going to get to both of those in a second. But I'm going to mention the square here because that Mars-Neptune, it's a square, right? Conversation of tension, needs some resolution. And it can have us feeling a bit frustrated, a bit confused. Like, think of those two energies of Mars, which is action, passion, drive, right? And then Neptune is a bit dreamy, a bit ethereal, nebulous, those kinds of words. And so we can feel a bit confused. We can have like misguided passions, for example, or overactive imagination, or just scattered actions, especially because Mars is in Gemini. We can feel a bit all over the map. And it can even make us feel a bit physically lethargic because it's like this tense kind of energy. Mars wants to act, Neptune wants to space out. So it can kind of be like, feel a bit frustrating there. But keep in mind that this influence is really at its peak only over a few days, and then it passes, right? So this too shall pass is always one of my favorite mantras. So I wanted to mention that, and then I haven't yet told you about the moon, and you know that I always like to let you know where the moon is at over the course of the week, right? Meaning Wednesday to Wednesday. That's how I do these videos, because it's really helpful to tune into the moon's energies. The cycle that the moon is in, the sign that the moon is in, can give us some insight in terms of our own instincts. The moon rules our instincts, emotions, feelings, how we're feeling kind of on the day to day. And it can not only give us insight, but a sense of, normalcy. Like, it's kind of, for example, if the moon is in her dark phase, we tend to have this need to be in solitude more, to need more sleep, to turn inward a little bit more, right before she goes new. So those kinds of things. So right now we've got the moon in Capricorn. of the time you're listening to this video. And the moon is right now waning, right? Because it was full, so it was in its waxing phase, and now it's waning. And so the energy is starting to kind of, um, be more directed inward rather than outward. So retracting rather than expanding. Um, and then the moon's moving into Aquarius on Friday, the 26th, and finally into Pisces on Sunday. So that's where the moon's at. Spoken to you about that conjunction between Uranus and the Sun and the square between Mars and Neptune. And now let's really get into kind of the meat of the forecast here, which is the fact that both Pluto and Saturn are stationing retrograde this week. Now, and that's happening in Capricorn, right? Where all of this stuff's shaken down in Capricorn between now and into 2020. And so the first thing I want to say to you is that Pluto and Saturn retrograde yearly, pretty much. And so it's not unusual in that regard. And Pluto is retrograde for about 5 months out of the year, and Saturn for about 4.5 months out of the year. And I'll give you the exact dates as we move on here. But so it's not unusual that this is happening, but it is important to take note and to pay attention. And particularly because, they are in close proximity to each other, as we know, in Capricorn, and still in very close proximity to the South Node as well. So it can have an extra emphasis for us, these retrogrades. And with these planets retrograding, they tend to bring about, it's not like the faster planets like Mercury retrograding, where the things that happen tend to be quicker, and the impact or the effects are more short term. Whereas when we've got, these slower moving planets, particularly Pluto, very slow moving. Pluto takes about 20 years to circle the zodiac, right? And so, or sorry, not 20 years to circle the zodiac. It spends about 20 years in each sign, give or take. It has a regular orbit. So it spends about 20 years in each sign. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the impact of a Pluto retrograde is more profound. It's more deep. The changes and the things that the retrograde highlights, these changes and these transformations, right? Transformation is a Pluto word. These regeneration, rebirth, that kind of thing, letting go, purging, detoxifying, all of those are Pluto words. This happens over a longer period of time, so it's a more slow change, but it's more profound than, say, a planet like Mercury going retrograde. And then Saturn takes about 2.5 years, spends about 2.5 years in each sign. And so, again, it's slower, not as slow as Pluto, but much slower than Mercury. And because Mercury spends about a week in each sign, or give or take. So, all right. So I wanted to mention those two kind of overall influences, it being that the transformations that happen, the changes that happen, the lessons that we need to learn, that's the Saturn piece, are more profound and come about over a longer period of time. So I'm going to show you the chart right now before we dive more specifically into the retrogrades, to show you how this is looking here. So here we've got And this is the chart for actually the 24th, which is the day that these videos come out. So here we've got, there's Pluto, and you can see that Pluto has just stationed retrograde. That little RX is the symbol, right, for retrograde motion. So we see that over here too, because Jupiter is in retrograde right now as well. The North Node, the nodes are always moving backwards. They're always in retrograde. So that's why there's that RX there. And then Saturn will soon, a few days later, also station retrograde. And so this is all happening, very close together here. The other thing I want to point out to you is that we've got Neptune here in Pisces. And I'm going to mention this too. This is lending us a bit of support during what may be a little bit more challenging time. So I'll speak to that. That's a sextile, a conversation of opportunity is happening there between Neptune and Pisces, and then, Saturn, Pluto in Capricorn. And then, what else do I want to mention here? There's Uranus right beside the sun, right? Conjuncting the sun in Taurus, right? Hovering around the kind of 3-degree mark there of Taurus. And I guess the other piece I'll mention is that Mercury at the time of, by the time Saturn goes retrograde, Mercury will be kind of squaring Saturn here. So I'll speak to that piece as well. Okay, I think and there's Mars and Gemini. Remember I mentioned Mars is squaring Neptune, right, in Pisces? So there's that piece. Okay, so that's the chart. And let's talk a little bit more specifically now about Pluto and Saturn retrograde. And we'll start with Pluto because it's happening first. So Pluto is retrograding on the 24th, the day that this video comes out. Pluto stations retrograde, Wednesday the 24th. And it will be retrograde until October 23rd of this year, 2019. So again, this happens every year for about 5 months at a time, right? And it's a time when we really go inward. All retrogrades are about kind of taking a step back, going inward in terms of the themes that planetary energy rules or speak to. So, so these changes, right, that are happening with Pluto moving through Capricorn, restructuring that area of our chart, are, again, not likely to be happening overnight. They're happening over a longer period of time. And, they may unfold over years kind of thing. But when the planet goes retrograde, so when Pluto's going retrograde, it's a time that these things are really brought to our attention, that we are being called to really take a closer look, to put them under the microscope a little bit, right? To really have some inward reflection on these themes. And with Pluto, those are things like our relationship to power and control, those issues, our obsessions and compulsions, our resistance to letting go, the need for, kind of purifying. Pluto is like the deepest, darkest corners, right? So getting into those crevices kind of, and taking a good hard look there at what's, at what's there and the cobwebs that need to be swept out there. It's a real deep internal process. It also can have to do with our fear of like losing control or of not being in control. And so as Pluto retrogrades, we think about all of these things, right? And they're brought to our attention. And it's really a time of eliminating those fears and those power issues, those power struggles, psychological blockages even. And particularly because this is in close contact with the South Node, a time of letting these things go and of allowing things to die off so that something new can be rebirthed, right? Remember, I always use the imagery of the phoenix rising from the ashes when we're talking about Pluto energy. But the piece we need to remind ourselves of sometimes is that the phoenix burns up before it rises from the ashes. And that's the piece that's not necessarily super fun, but it causes profound, powerful change. And so that's what we want to keep in mind here, right? And then the Saturn retrograde piece, that's Saturn stations retrograde on Monday the 29th of April, and it will be retrograde until September 18th, 2019. And again, I'll repeat, this happens once a year, approximately once a year as well, for about 4.5 months. And this is the phrase that came to mind here when I was thinking about Saturn retrograde. Saturn is often connected to our karma, just like the South Node. It's like the karma of responsibility, right? Saturn is all about being an adult. It's about adulting. It's about, maturity and mastery and being responsible. And so this retrograde, the Saturn retrograde, it might impact us in sort of direct relation to how responsible we have chosen to be in our life, in particularly in the Capricorn area of our chart in this case. How responsible or not have we chosen to be? Have we been doing our adulting, or have we been shirking our adult responsibilities, right? So it's a time of sort of correcting the balance there. And as Saturn stations retrograde, he will be in square with Mercury, like I showed you on the chart. And so that's kind of suggesting that our thoughts, our communications, our ideas, right, may be significant in terms of the lessons that Saturn is trying to teach us. Saturn is like the strict teacher, and he wants us to learn lessons, and doesn't want us to take shortcuts. And so, we have to kind of reflect on what lessons are we needing to learn. What lessons is the universe trying to teach us right now, right? And when difficulties arise, a good approach is, what can this teach me? What is this here for me to learn? Not like, woe is me, why does this always happen to me? Not playing the victim, right? That is not the way to deal with these energies. It's not proactive, that's not productive, that's not self-empowering when we play the victim. So these retrogrades are obviously both happening in the sign of Capricorn. And this is about, putting our nose to the grindstone. It's about work before fun. But then we get to reap the rewards in the long term if we do the work, right? So during this, essentially over the course of, the late spring and through the summer months, in the northern hemisphere anyhow, opposite if you're in the southern hemisphere. But it's a time where we are required to be patient. We may have to, there may be some austerity measures necessary at this time. We might have to face some obstacles, some disappointments, and we're being asked to kind of dismantle, to correct, to fix any issues that need to be fixed, right? To transform what's broken in the Capricorn area of our chart. Again, to build a more solid foundation for our future, which is really in our own best interest, right? And in the best interest of anybody who we care about as well. So we're being asked to learn a lesson in some area of life, a lesson that doesn't necessarily come easy. And so I was thinking about, an analogy to me when we're talking about these Saturn and Pluto retrograding in Capricorn. It's like, taking a course with a big final exam. But it's not like the kind of, it's not a bird course. It's not a course that you can just breeze through, not show up to class, and then think you're going to, cram for the exam the night before and pass with flying colors, or pass at all, really. This is more about, it's a class where we have to commit. We have to commit to going to class, even when we don't feel like it, even if we have to wake up super early, to be there, to be engaged in the class, to be present, like to be mindful, paying attention to the teacher, doing the work, reading the textbook, doing the assignments and getting a good grasp of the basics. And maybe even having to redo some assignments if we want to up our grade, those kinds of things. But in the end, if we do the work, we will reap the rewards. We'll graduate, right? Graduate with honors. And so it's worth it in the long run, right? I mean, it may not feel worth it when you're in the thick of it, but in the end, it will feel worth it. And we always have the option, right? Because if you've ever had a reading with me, you will hear me say to you, and you may have heard me say in these videos before, we always get to choose. We may not get to choose what life throws at us, but we always get to choose how we respond to it. Ultimately, that power is always, ours. It may not seem like it is at the time, but even if it's control over our thinking about something, that's empowerment, right? That's a kind of empowerment. So if we choose to kind of be a slacker, which is our choice, right? We can just kind of ignore it. We can not show up to class, we can, plagiarize the paper, or we can, think we're going to get off doing the minimum, that sort of thing, just borrowing our friends' notes. Then in all likelihood, we're gonna flunk. We're gonna flunk the exam. We're gonna flunk the course. We're gonna have to take it over again if we want to graduate, and the choice is ours. So that's really, it sounds maybe a bit harsh, but that's the truth. And so I don't want to sugarcoat it for you. But the thing is, it's in our own best interest to do this. This can be really good. We can build a really strong foundation and a really promising future for ourselves if we choose to do the work, right? And a piece of good news and support that's happening is I showed you on the chart that Saturn and Pluto are sextiling Neptune, right? So the sextile is a conversation of opportunity. And so this is an opportunity, as I see it, to kind of gain some spiritual wisdom, and to make our dreams, Neptune, come true through some hard work, being conscientious, not through procrastination and delusion, which can also be a Neptunian thing, right? So it's an opportunity really for deep and profound healing on some level if we choose to take that opportunity and do what's required of us. So the house which this is happening in for you, right, and which is where Capricorn falls in your chart, it highlights the life themes that are calling out right now for extra care, extra attention, extra responsibility over the course of the retrograde period. So it can feel like a bit of a pressure cooker, but keep in mind ultimately that, you've got the ability to release the pressure. It may not happen as quickly as you want it to, but if you, if you do the work, like I said, then you will reap the rewards, right? It's like the universe is saying to all of us at this point in time, hey, this is important for your future, so pay attention right now and to these things, to this life area in particular, and use the difficulties to empower you. It's like the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell writes about. It's time for being the hero of your own life, right? Not the victim. And if you've done any reading on the hero's journey, like it's not fun, it's not easy, but ultimately, you get through it, and you're wiser, stronger, more resilient, and all of that at the end of it. So that's a good thing. Nothing worth learning, really, or worth having, I guess. That's a Saturn Pluto kind of phrase. Nothing worth having comes easy, really. I'm paraphrasing there. I can't remember the exact phrase, but you get my drift. So now that I've gone through all of that, I'm going to speak to each sign. And before I do that, I want to mention to you that if you have planets, points, roughly between 18 and 25 degrees. And you can even be broader with that, because these are slower moving planets. They have a kind of a wider reaching impact. But if you have planets points at those degrees, like kind of between 18 and 25, stretch it out a little more, of the cardinal signs, right? Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn, then you're going to likely feel this transit more strongly, more profoundly, than some of us who don't have planets and points there. So if you've got your sun, your moon, your rising, or cluster of planets, even any of your personal planets around 18, 25 degrees of the cardinal signs, then you're likely to feel this most. And so let's get to Pluto and Saturn retrograding for each of the signs. Keeping in mind, you listen for your rising sign first and foremost in these general forecasts, but also your sun sign and your moon sign, which will give you sort of a more internalized piece of information, right? The moon is like our emotions, our internal world, that kind of thing, our sense of emotional security. And so your moon sign sort of speaks to what's going on at an internal level. So let's get to it. And we're going to start with Capricorn, because obviously Capricorn, this is all shaken down in your sign. And so this is the first house for you. And so you may be in this phase of profound, restructuring of the self. And that's being highlighted through this retrograde, right? So increased work, increased responsibility, a call for an overhaul and some deep transformation and profound healing of the self, your physical body. It could have to do with your appearance, your physical health and vitality, how you present yourself out in the world, the impression that you make. And ultimately, this isn't easy, but it is worth it in the long run. And if anybody can keep climbing that mountain, despite the obstacles, it's Capricorn. And so you are kind of the one leading the way for the rest of us through this time. We're looking to you, your sense of authority and mastery and resilience and ability to really take charge and lead the way. So that's for you, Capricorn. And moving on to Sagittarius. Sag, this is happening in your second house. So you might have to be, putting your nose to the grindstone over these next 4 to 5 months in terms of your resources. So your own personal resources, your money, your time, your material possessions, your values and valuables, what you value, who you value, in life, your sense of self-worth as well. So there's a slow, steady process unfolding here in this area of life for you, and some lessons that are needing to be learned. And these retrogrades, right? This retrograde is a time when these things are really brought to the forefront and brought to your attention to be worked on. So that's for you, Sag. And moving on to Scorpio. Scorpio, we've got Pluto and Saturn retrograding through your third house. So lots of work required and transformation required of you in relation to how you communicate, to your thoughts and ideas even, related to your immediate environment. So, the surrounding environment, your peers, your neighbors, your cousins, your siblings, even your sort of daily commute or those short trips you take is governed by the third house. And so all of those things, particularly, communications, messages exchanged back and forth, how we communicate, how we think, our ideas, our internal dialogue even, is really going through this process of profound, restructuring. And so, just understand that over the course of these next 4 to 5 months, that's really, it's calling out for your attention. And so, and for doing the work. Remember the analogy of the exam and that I used at the intro, and know that in the end, it's all in your best interest, right? For your own good. So that's for you, Scorpio. Moving on to Libra. Libra, we've got this retrograde of Saturn and Pluto happening in your 4th house. So changes are unfolding and there's lessons to be learned in regards to your home, to your actual place of living. It could be, your house or wherever you live. Regarding your family and your ancestry and your roots and your emotional security as well. And so there may be some like even purging that's being required of you, over this transit, and you're really, looking at going over things with a fine-tooth comb right now and seeing, what needs to be to be purged, literally, right? That can be a Pluto theme in the 4th house. But this hard work that you're being asked to do here, that may bring up obstacles and all of that. But if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you do the adulting that needs to happen in this area, then it leads to really significant gains in the long run. So that's for you, Libra. Moving on to Virgo. Virgo, this is happening in your 5th house, the retrograde of Pluto and Saturn. So extra effort is required of you in this 5th house over the next, particularly over the next 4 to 5 months. A mastery, a deep overhaul in relation to children, right? So your own children or children that you work with in some way or are associated with, to your inner child and what's going on with your inner child. Healing the inner child can be a big theme for some people over this transit. Your creative self-expression, your creativity, your creative projects, the creative work you put out there, right? Also, how you bring joy into your life, fun, romance, pleasure, those sorts of things. There's a big overhaul happening here. And it may feel like, all work and no play for a while. But ultimately, it's for the better in the long run. So keep that in mind. And rather than feeling like, oh, everything's a hard work and, it sucks kind of thing, just try to keep the long range view in mind. And ultimately, it will pay off. So moving on to Leo. Leo, this retrograde's happening in your 6th house. So you are gaining mastery and being asked to transform in terms of your daily routines. And this can be like your paid or unpaid work routines, your health and wellness routines, relationships with people who are not like your equals. So employer-employee relationships, for example. This can be like a detoxing of the body, right? In general, that is required or is highlighted right now. If you work in some kind of like health-related scenario, it can impact your day-to-day work routines in that area of life, right? And so again, it can feel like a bit of a slog sometime. I feel a bit of being kind of lost in the weeds, right? And hard work, lots of learning that needs to happen. But ultimately, it's for your own good in the long run. Mastering this area of life, right? And transforming is for your own good in the long run. So that's for you, Leo. Cancer, this is happening in your 7th house of one-to-one relationships. So that's what's being highlighted during these retrogrades for you. And, contractual partnerships, business partnerships, one-to-one relationships of all kinds. And so there's like a rebirthing process happening here. You're being asked to kind of master this area of life, to transform it, to, transform relationship dynamics, and to do some hard work and perhaps, some letting go in this area that will ultimately lead to a more solid, stable foundation from which to move forward with your one-to-one relationships, Cancer. Okay, moving on now to Gemini. Gemini, this is happening in your 8th house, right? So Saturn and Pluto are retrograding through your 8th house. And this is a call to gaining mastery and to transform your shared resources. So those resources that you share with other people, and that can be through a partner, like a spouse. It could be through, clients. It can be through taxes, insurance payments, wills, bursaries, loans, all of that kind of thing. Also has to do with your relationship in general to your psychological health, to power and control dynamics, to your intimate connections. And so this is an area calling for your attention during this, particularly during this, retrograde. Really, really, the magnifying glass is being put over this area of life for you and asking you to do the work required, right? And do the adulting required, and it will pay off in the long run. Okay, moving on to Taurus. Taurus, this is happening in your ninth house. So an overhaul and a gaining a sense of mastery and really putting your nose to the grindstone in regards to your belief system, your philosophical approach to the world. Areas of study, teaching, learning, travel, publishing, mentors, right? Teachers. This area, all of these things are being highlighted for you. They may feel like hard work. You may be like really undergoing a course of study right now that's really hard work, and but it's quite transformative in the long run, asking you to change the way you approach these life themes, which ultimately is for your good in the long run. And so just keep putting one foot in front of the other, just like Taurus really has that ability to just keep moving, and slow and steady wins the race, Taurus. Okay, moving on to Aries. This retrograde is happening in your 10th house of career, of public reputation, of your achievement, of your status, and of your authority and your relationship to authority, of the public legacy that you leave. And so there is profound change happening here, and a lot of hard work being required of you in this department. And it can feel like a real slog sometimes, but ultimately, it can lead to massive gains and really, be something profoundly healing in these areas for you over the long run, Aries. So just don't lose heart when the going gets tough, right? Just keep at it, and it will all work out in the end. And then Pisces, this is happening in your 11th house. So hard work, mastery, transformation, purging, rebirth in the area that has to do with your friends and friendship groups, networks, even the internet, the collective, benefactors, like people you encounter that can help you out along your journey, your hopes and dreams for the future. The 11th house is sometimes known as the house of wishes fulfilled. So if you want to make your dreams come true, ultimately, Pisces, you need to work for it, right? But the possibility is there, but you need to do the work and put in the adulting in these areas, and then reap the rewards over time. So that's for you, Pisces. And then last but not least, we've got Aquarius, where this retrograde is happening in your 12th house. So Saturn Pluto in the 12th. And this is about mastering your inner life, about transformation of the unconscious, of your spirituality, of perhaps any kind of, self-defeating or self-destructing behaviors, even addictions. This is about transforming your relationship to your alone time and what you do in solitude, right? How you spend your time in solitude. What happens behind closed doors is the 12th house. It could even be in relation to some situation involving, places that are kind of hidden away from the world. So hospitals, treatment centers, retreat centers, those kinds of things. If, those factor into your life in some way. And so this deep restructuring, this hard work, this transformation, this nose to the grindstone, this, mastery is being asked of you in those 12th house areas. And so, when the going gets tough, Aquarius, just take heart, keep going, and it'll be ultimately for the best in the long run. So that's all 12 signs, folks, and I hope this was helpful to you. It's a profound time we are all in, and we're all in it together. That's the important thing to keep in mind. Okay, so take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.